ASMR. I am Ari, and today we are set up in my kitchen. This is my kitchen counter here. I would like to make some sugar cookies. And if you have seen my gingerbread cookie video, you will know that I am a very amateur baker. I just don't really bake very often, so I'm pretty basic with my skills. So please maybe fact check everything that I am saying or doing before you repeat it. So I wanted to bake some sugar cookies today, and I have a recipe from Sally's Baking Addiction, which is the same baker recipe blog that I got my gingerbread cookie recipe from. So this is the recipe here that we're going to be using. This is her soft cutout sugar cookies. So I'm going to get right into it and show you the ingredients that we're going to be using. So we have flour, granulated sugar, butter. I am going to be using margarine, and this is salted, and the recipe calls for unsalted butter. So I am not going to add salt. The recipe does call for salt, but I'm not going to add it just because this is salted. And then I have vanilla extract. I just use imitation vanilla because it's cheaper. We need 1 egg and baking powder. And then I have my stand mixer just over here off to the side. And I have our measuring cups and spoons, as well as a mixing bowl. So the first thing that we're going to do is mix our dry ingredients. So I have this white mixing bowl here. So realize I have some sunshine coming through the window over there, so the lighting's a little bit weird. So I have our mixing bowl, and I'm going to grab our flour and open it up. So we need 2 1/4 cups of flour. So I'm going to start with 1 cup here, and I'm going to just spoon the flour in here. And just gonna level that off a little bit. Let's grab our second cup. And 1/4 cup. Now we need half a teaspoon of baking powder. Just going to take my wooden spoon and mix that together. And I'm going to set this off to the side. Now I'm going to mix the butter and sugar in my stand mixer. And we need 3/4 of a cup of butter. And these sticks are marked, so a full stick is half a cup. And this is just half a stick. And we need 3/4 of a cup of sugar. So my 1/4 cup here. Now I'm going to add the paddle attachment to my stand mixer. And we're going to let this mix together for about 3 minutes. I am going to start a voiceover here just because, as you can guess, the stand mixer is in fact quite loud. And the rest of the video has quite a few loud noises as well. So I will just be describing what I'm doing and going through the process of baking these cookies. So this has been mixing for a little bit, and I'm just going to stop it so that I can scrape the sides and make sure that everything is getting well and properly mixed. And just scraping off the excess from my spatula. And I'm going to lower the top and let this mix for a little bit longer. Now that that has been mixing for a while, I'm going to stop it and crack 1 egg into the mixture. went better than my gingerbread cookies video. And I'm going to add my vanilla extract. And then I'm going to lower the stand mixer and let this mix for a little bit. Again, I'm just going to raise up the mixer and scrape the sides just to make sure that everything is getting nicely mixed. And I'll let that mix again for a little bit longer. So during this time, I paused my phone recording and forgot to unpause it, but I then added my flour, baking powder, and some cinnamon and let that all mix together into a nice, still sticky dough. I'm just taking my spatula and scraping down the sides and the paddle again. This dough is supposed to be pretty sticky, but it was still stickier than I wanted, so the recipe did recommend that you can slowly add a tablespoon of flour as needed until it gets to the right consistency. And I let that mix for a bit longer until it fully came together as the right consistency that I wanted. So let's lift the top and just get as much of the dough off of the paddle as I can. And I'm going to put away the ingredients and clear the area so that I can prepare the dough to go in the fridge. I am putting a little bit of flour in this dish so that I can use it to lightly flour the parchment paper and rolling pin that I'm going to be using with the dough. And I'm going to lightly flour the surface. I am grabbing my first half of the dough. I roughly split it into two in the bowl. And I'm just placing that here on the parchment paper. The recipe recommends rolling out the dough before you chill it. And I think that my dough was still a little bit stickier than I wanted because you can see it was sticking to the rolling pin quite a bit, which was not exactly what I wanted. So I ultimately decided that that was a lost cause and floured it a little bit more and just formed it with my hands. And now I'm just going to move this off to the side so that I can prepare the second sheet for the rest of the dough. I'm laying that out on the counter and then I'm just putting the bowl up in the corner to help keep it pressed down. And here is the remaining dough. Scraping the last little bits out of the bowl. And I preemptively added some extra flour on the top just from remembering my mistake with the first part of the dough. And then I'm just going to really, really gently roll that out with the floured rolling pin. And this one definitely went a lot better with adding that extra flour on the top. And I want to set these in the fridge and not have them get disturbed or place them on top of things and have them fall. So I have a small baking sheet that I'm going to slide them onto. So there's the first one, and then I floured the top of that one a little bit, and then I'm placing this second one just right on top of that. So I covered these in saran wrap and then placed them in the fridge to chill overnight. And here we are the next day. I am getting the counter prepped so that I can now roll out the dough and cut the cookie shapes to bake. So I'm placing some paper towels just to make cleanup a little bit easier. And here is our wooden cutting board that I'll be working on, my wooden rolling pin, and my little small dish of flour. I picked up these cute heart-shaped cookie cutters, and I thought that they would be perfect for these Valentine's Day cookies. So these are the two sizes that I wanted to try. Here is the first disc of dough. And I'm going to flour our work surface and spread that around, as well as flour my rolling pin. I'm just trying to make sure that that is relatively covered. Now let's unwrap the first disc of dough. Place that onto the cutting board. Now I'm going to roll this out a little bit more because I think that I left it pretty thick when I originally put it in the fridge. And it's a little bit easier to roll out now that it is chilled and not as sticky. So I've got that nice and flat, and I'm going to place my cookie cutters and press those down. And then I like to just wiggle the cookie cutter a little bit just to make sure that it is fully separated. And then I can pull it out, and here's our first little heart shape. And I'm going to do that same thing with the second bigger heart. I'm just going to wiggle it and pull away some of the excess dough. And there is our second cookie. I realized at this point that the bigger shape was quite a bit big, but I wanted to try a second cookie just in case. And here is another one. And pulling away the cookie cutter, there's our second big heart. And I really like to try and use as much of the real estate of the dough as possible so that I'm not having to roll it out a bunch more and add more and more flour to it. And that's the last cookie for this first rolled out dough. So I'm now going to gather the dough scraps and roll it out again. Grabbing a little bit more flour to flour the surface. And then I'm just going to roll out this dough. And once I've got that to the thickness that I want, I'm going to place my cookie cutter. And I did decide that I would just use the smaller of the cookie cutters because the other one was just a little bit too large for what I was wanting. I'm just using up the rest of this rolled out dough. And then I just rolled out the dough again. And there's only space for one heart this time. I find it so satisfying peeling away the excess dough from around the cookie cutter. It's really fun. And here is our full baking sheet ready for the oven. Forgot to mention that I did have the oven preheating this whole time while I've been rolling out, preparing the dough. And then here is my second disc of dough. I'm just carefully unwrapping that from the parchment paper. Luckily it didn't really stick at all. But I did have some pretty heavy lines of flour from around the edges where it just kind of pooled up in the parchment paper. So I'm going to flatten that out just a little bit more just to get the dough a tiny bit thinner. I'm going to place the cookie cutter, give it a little bit of a wiggle, and there we go. And it's just out of shot, but I do have my second baking dish prepped with the silicone mat just off to the side. I'll just continue on now and do the same process. Use up as much of the dough as I can for each roll out. And I'm repeating the process. I've just gathered the scraps of dough, forming that into a ball and rolling it out. Placing my cookie cutter and giving it a little bit of a wiggle. And this one fit 2 of our hearts. And I roll out these scraps again, and this one only had space for the one heart. I just continued on with this process until I used up all of the rest of the dough. I also had these really tiny, cute little cookie cutters in the same set, and I decided to use those on some of the smaller scraps of dough. Here is the second cookie sheet all ready to go into the oven. And while those were baking, I cleaned up our area. And when I have extra flour from doing cookies, I usually pop it into a Ziploc baggie so that I can just use it again for flouring surfaces. I don't want to put it back with the rest of the flour, but I also don't necessarily want to toss it if it's still okay to use. So now I'm putting down these oven mitts and setting up my cooling rack for the first batch of cookies that have been cooling on the pan for about 5 minutes, and they're ready to take off. I have this metal spatula that I'm using to help take the cookies off of the pan just because it is still a little bit hot. It's cooled down quite a bit, but I don't want to burn my fingers. There are the cute little hearts that I did. And by editing magic, the second sheet of cookies is now ready to get placed on the cooling sheet as well. So I am rearranging the cookies to try and fit as many as possible on the cooling rack. I don't think that I needed to have them alternating in direction like I did, but maybe it did help them fit more. I don't know. Now, I also wanted to try another sugar cookie recipe that I had not tried before, and I was baking some of these cookies for my husband to bring into work and share with his coworkers. So I wanted to try out this second sugar cookie recipe, and it is a no chill recipe, which I thought would potentially be really great because you can make them a little bit faster. You don't have to schedule in that cooling time. So I wanted to try these out and see the difference. I wanted to make them back to back with the other cookies so that I could directly try them, but I also didn't want to just have a bunch of cookies sitting around the house, so this was the perfect time for my husband to be able to bring in lots of cookies and have his coworkers tell us what they think as well. So for this recipe, we need flour, powdered sugar, baking powder, vanilla extract, egg, and butter. I'm using margarine. I halved the original recipe because I didn't necessarily want to make a ton of cookies. I just wanted to try out this recipe and see what I thought. And then I let that mix together until it is well combined. And because I halved the recipe, I needed half of an egg. So I cracked the egg into a separate cup, put half of that into this measuring cup. I don't know if that is the official way that it should have been done, but it's the way that I did it. And I'm adding the vanilla extract. And then after I've added that, I am just scraping down the sides again to let it all mix together. So I'm letting that go for a few more minutes until it looks pretty well combined. While that is going, I'm going to add the baking powder to my bowl of flour. As well as my salt. This way I can mix them all together with a fork and try and get out any clumps. And then I spoon that in slowly into the mixture. This dough is certainly less sticky than the other recipe, which I think is to be expected. It's an entirely different consistency, the ingredients are different, and it isn't supposed to need to chill in the fridge. And then I have set up my rolling station again with a new cutting board. And this recipe recommended using powdered sugar to roll out the cookies instead of flour so that they don't get dried out. And I thought that that was a really smart thing. I don't bake a ton, and so I had never seen that before. I don't know if that is something that everyone knows, but I thought it was so smart, so I tried that out. I'm grabbing the dough from the bowl and just plopping that right down. Some of it wanted to stick a little bit to the spoon, but not too bad. Now I am going to form this into a ball so that I can roll it out. I really liked working with this dough a lot more than the other recipe. give that another flip. Again, I don't know if anything that I'm doing is a good method, but I feel like it works for me. And I cut ahead a little bit, but I'm just doing the same process. I'm cutting out the cookies, trying to use up as much real estate of the rolled out dough as much as possible. And I decided to go with the same size cookie cutter for these ones as the other batch. I've gathered all of those dough scraps and I'm just rolling that out again. I wasn't sure how working with the powdered sugar would turn out, but I really enjoyed it. And because I have the recipe, we had just enough cookies to do one baking sheet. And again, with some editing magic, here are the fully baked cookies ready to transfer to the cooling sheet. The recipe also clearly stated that they should not turn brown while cooking, that you should pull them before they get to that point. And now it is time to decorate our cookies. I say decorate very loosely. We're going to be dipping our cookies into royal icing, so I need to make that royal icing. So for this icing recipe, we need powdered sugar, meringue powder, and water. And I'm adding my whisk attachment, and I'm going to let this mix until we get about an 8 to 10 second icing, which I learned means that when you lift the icing and it drips, it should take about 8 to 10 seconds for it to fully dissolve back into the icing. And I noticed that it was a little bit too quick, so I just needed to beat it for a little bit longer and introduce some more air into the icing. If it stays too thick, you can also add more powdered sugar. So here I am just testing it again. I'm waiting until I get a side drip off of the whisk. And it was the amount of time that I wanted. So I'm removing the whisk. So now I can dip my cookies. So here is our first sheet of cookies. These were from the original recipe. So what I'm going to do is take a cookie and just dip it face down into the icing. And then I lift it and let the icing drip off. And then I'd seen this tip to give the cookie a shake to help get excess icing off. And then it looks a little bit rough still, but it does smooth and flatten out. And you could hold the cookie over the icing for even longer and let more icing drip off and have it come out cleaner, but I didn't really bother too much with that. I'd also forgotten to take a spatula and scrape the top of the icing because that helps pop all of the little air bubbles that have risen to the surface. you can get a nice cleaner icing on the cookie without as many air bubbles. And it's really satisfying doing it this way because as you're scraping the spatula just lightly over the surface, you can hear all of the air bubbles popping. So I'd forgotten to do that before I dipped my first cookie, but that's okay. They're just air bubbles. So I grabbed a toothpick so that I could quickly pop those, and the icing will just fill in around them so you're not left with big craters in the icing as long as you do it early enough before the icing has start to set. But ultimately, I'm making these cookies for fun, just to share, and they're not for anything super special, so I wasn't too concerned with them coming out perfect. And I'm taking that same toothpick and just running right along the edge to help clean up the excess icing that was dripping off. And I continue that same process with all of the rest of the cookies. I just dip it in the icing, let it drip off for a little bit, give it a good shake, and flip it around. And any mistakes that I see, I'm able to just take the toothpick and fill in or drag the icing to a spot of the cookie that was a little bit more bare and clean up the edges. And then I found this really pretty sparkly pink sanding sugar at Walmart, and I thought that it would make for some really cute Valentine's Day cookies. So I wanted to give this a try. And if you have any tips on how to use this and have it come out nice and even on the top of the cookie, please share. Because I was having a really hard time getting it to evenly spread over the cookie. So I first started by just tapping the bottle. That wasn't really working, so I sprinkled some in my hand and just sprinkled it around with my fingers, which did work pretty well. But then I was noticing that I was getting some staining on my fingers. So then I poured some out into a little dish, and I thought that I would try and dip the cookie into it, but this did not look great at all. I was just again getting clumps of the sanding sugar rather than having it nicely dispersed all over the cookie. So I decided to just sprinkle some of the excess sanding sugar just over that cookie to try and make it look a little bit better. And then I gave the cookies a good shake over the little dish to try and shake off any extra sprinkles. And we're just going to continue on dipping the cookies into the icing. I really like this icing recipe. I feel like it is really versatile if I want to do the dipping like this, or if for some reason I wanted to experiment more with piping the icing. I've tried my hand at piping cookies before. If you watched my gingerbread cookie video, that was my first time ever trying the piping method, and you saw how that went. So I decided that I'm just going to stick to dipping them. It is faster for me. I think that they still look okay. The icing settles nicely and smooths out. Ultimately, this method just works better for me. It is very satisfying watching the icing smooth out over the cookies because you can see I'm not letting all of it drip off of the cookie, probably as much as I should. But then I set it down and it just smooths out so nicely. And I saved a little bit of time while I was letting some of the cookies drip. I would just take my little toothpick and drag along the edges of the other cookies and clean them up. I decided to do the standing sugar on all of these cookies, and then I would leave it off of some of the cookies in the next batch, just in case if somebody had a sensitivity to certain food dyes or didn't like sprinkles or anything like that, they might still be able to enjoy some of the cookies. And here is the next batch of the cinnamon sugar cookies. I'm doing that same process. I'm dipping a cookie, cleaning it up with a toothpick. And this tray was the second recipe of cookies. And I'm doing the same process of dipping, letting it drip off, and then I decided to do half and half with the sprinkles for this batch. So half of the cookies got sprinkles, half of them just got the icing. And I think that they're still cute for Valentine's Day in the little heart shapes. And here are the finished cookies. Certainly far from perfect, but they are delicious, and I think that they are cute enough. Like I said, if you have any tips for me on how to make the sanding sugar sprinkle nicely, please tell me. I will include the recipes for both sugar cookies as well as the royal icing in the description. And here is me sitting down with one of the new recipe cookies. I really liked this recipe. They reminded me of the store-bought sugar cookies that you can get like anywhere. They have like the seasonal ones and they're really, really soft. This recipe tasted so similar to those. And here are the cookies that we wrapped up for my husband to take to work. And we had these cute heart plates, and I think that the cookies look really cute. Well, I hope that you enjoyed watching me bake some cute Valentine's Day sugar cookies. Let me know if you have any tips for me. I'm very happy to learn. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you have a wonderful day and a wonderful Valentine's Day coming up. Goodbye.